They laughed, my parents, in a room full of people who shared my blood but not my heart. My name is Emily Carter, and that day, I felt like the loneliest person alive. The will reading took place in a cold, glass-walled law office in downtown Chicago, the kind of place that smelled of leather chairs and old money. I sat at the far end of a long mahogany table, my palms sweaty, my heart heavy. My mother, Susan Carter, covered her mouth as if trying to hide a smile, but the glint in her eyes betrayed her amusement. My father, Robert Carter, shook his head, his voice dripping with mock pity. $10, huh? He said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A ripple of laughter spread through the room, cousins, uncles, aunts, all of them more entertained by my humiliation than focused on their inheritance. The lawyer, Mr. James Whitaker, adjusted his glasses, his voice steady as he read from the will. To Emily Carter, the sum of $10. That was it. No explanation, no reason, just $10. My face burned as I kept my gaze on the polished surface of the table, refusing to let them see my tears. I had grown used to being the disappointment, the odd one out, the daughter who chose a camera over corporate meetings, who saw art where they saw spreadsheets. I was ready to leave, to escape the walls that seemed to close in on me. But then, Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. Actually, he said, his tone softening, there's something else. A private letter addressed solely to Emily. The room fell silent. I looked up for the first time and saw it, the fear flickering in my parents' eyes. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's smile faltered. They hadn't expected this. Neither had I. Let me tell you something about my family. The Carters weren't just wealthy, they were legacy. My grandfather, Henry Carter, built an empire from nothing, starting with a single hardware store in Milwaukee that grew into a nationwide chain. My parents inherited it like royalty, and they ruled it with iron expectations. Every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner felt like another board meeting. I was the mistake in their perfect plan. While my older brother, Andrew Carter, was groomed for the throne, I was the girl who sketched in the margins, who photographed cracked sidewalks and graffiti, who dreamed of light and shadow instead of profit margins. The last time I saw my grandfather alive was 3 weeks before he died. It wasn't planned. I had finished photographing an abandoned church on the south side and found myself standing outside his brownstone on Magnolia Avenue. I didn't know why I rang the bell. Maybe I just needed to feel seen. He answered the door himself, thinner and slower than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. Well, he said, with that familiar smirk, a Carter who knocks. We sat in his study surrounded by shelves of books and the faint scent of cedar. We didn't talk about the family. He asked about my photography, really requested. What are you working on? I told him about my project, capturing forgotten places before they disappeared forever. He listened, really listened, and when I left, he pressed something into my hands, a battered old film camera. Don't let them take your eye, Emily, he said. That's your gift. I clung to that memory as I followed Mr. Whitaker down the hall to a smaller office. On the desk sat an envelope, thick and cream-colored, my name written across it in my grandfather's familiar cursive. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling the weight of everything I had never dared hope for. Mr. Whitaker excused himself, leaving me alone. I broke the wax seal, embossed with a tiny camera symbol, and began to read. My dearest Emily, it began, and with those words, everything changed. My dearest Emily, the letter began, and I felt my breath hitch. The words flowed in my grandfather's precise hand, the ink slightly smudged where his fingers must have lingered. He apologized first, for the spectacle, for the $10 inheritance that he knew would cut deep, for allowing me to feel abandoned in that moment. But then he explained. He wanted them to reveal themselves, to show me exactly who they were when they believed I had nothing. He needed me to see it clearly, without the haze of hope or obligation. The letter detailed a plan, one he'd spent years constructing quietly, patiently. The $10 was a distraction, a decoy. The real inheritance had been secured away from the public will, away from prying eyes and greedy hands. My heart pounded as I read. I was the sole beneficiary of the Carter Creative Trust, a holding company he'd built in secret, an entity far more valuable than the family business my parents clung to so tightly. Along with that came ownership of a private gallery in downtown Chicago, a penthouse studio on Lakeshore Drive, and a controlling interest in a foundation dedicated to funding creative pursuits. It was staggering, the kind of inheritance that didn't just change lives, it shaped futures. And it was mine. But there was more. My grandfather's words cut deeper than any dollar amount. "They laughed too soon, Emily," he wrote, "and they will never see it coming. But remember, this is not about revenge. It's about vision, yours." He spoke of his youth, of dreams left behind in the rush to build the Carter Empire. A boy who once carried that same battered camera everywhere, who saw beauty in small, forgotten places before he traded it for boardrooms and balance sheets. "I built the company, but I lost my sight," he confessed. "You never did, and that's why I chose you." By the time I finished the letter, my hands trembled not from fear or sadness, but from the enormity of what he had entrusted to me. Tucked inside the envelope was a brass key on a slender leather cord, cool and solid in my palm. The note beneath it read simply, "Your studio, your real inheritance." For a long time, I sat in that quiet room, the city humming far below. The letter spread across the desk like a map to a world I hadn't known was mine. And then, slowly, I rose, folded the letter, and slipped it into my purse. My heart steadied. My path, for the first time, felt clear. When I returned to the conference room, my parents were still basking in their smug certainty. My father made some offhand remark about framing the check. My mother didn't even glance at me. I said nothing, just took my seat, silent, watching. Watching. I saw them for who they were, people so sure they had won, so blind to what truly mattered. Over the next few days, I began the quiet process of claiming what was mine. Mr. Whitaker became my ally, guiding me through the legal maze, transferring ownership, and securing my place at the helm of the trust. I visited the gallery on Wabash Avenue, stepping through doors my grandfather had once dreamed of entering as an artist, not a tycoon. It was beautiful, clean lines, high ceilings, windows that bathed the space in golden light. And there, in the locked office, I found them, my photographs, the ones I'd sold for next to nothing just to survive. My grandfather had bought them all, under aliases, preserving them like treasures. The penthouse on Lakeshore Drive felt like stepping into possibility. Minimalist, sunlit, with views of the city I loved and feared in equal measure. It wasn't just a home, it was a promise that I could be more than the girl they'd dismissed. But as I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows, the weight of it all settled on my shoulders. What would I do with this power? How would I honor it without becoming like them? I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't waste a second proving myself to people who had never cared to see me. I would build, I would create. And when they finally learned the truth, it would be because I had left them no choice but to see it. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life, and the most determined. I kept my head down, working alongside Mr. Whitaker to untangle the intricate threads of my grandfather's plan. The Carter Creative Trust wasn't just some vanity project. It was a carefully constructed force, holding investments in publishing, design firms, small museums, and artist residencies across the country. It had been quietly accumulating assets while the rest of the family clawed over vacation homes and stock portfolios. And now it was mine to shape. I spent long nights at the penthouse studio, walking the empty rooms, staring out at the city's patchwork of lights, thinking of how to turn legacy into vision. I knew I didn't want boardrooms or business suits. That wasn't me. My path wasn't about revenge or spectacle. It was about creation. My grandfather had chosen me because I had an eye, and it was time I used it. So I planned. I envisioned a gallery that wasn't just about art for art's sake, but about voices that had been overlooked, dismissed, like mine had been. I dreamed of turning the Wabash Avenue Gallery into a space that celebrated unseen perspectives, artists from underserved communities, photographers capturing forgotten places, painters telling the stories of those left behind. And as the pieces came together, I began to craft an invitation, not just to an opening, but to a reckoning. I called it The Inheritance of Vision, a debut exhibit that would showcase my work alongside emerging artists I'd quietly begun to support through the trust. Every photograph I chose for the show was a piece of my journey: rusted fences from my teenage days, graffiti-streaked walls from the city's forgotten corners, portraits of people whose names the world never bothered to learn. The gallery became my story, laid bare in black and white and color, light and shadow. When the invitations went out, crisp, minimal, with only the gallery name and the exhibit title embossed in silver, I made sure my family received theirs by certified mail. There was no note, no explanation, just a date, a time, and a place they had never thought would belong to me. Andrew RSVP'd within hours, probably thinking of publicity. My mother sent a cool, non-committal text. "We'll see." My father said nothing, but through family whispers, I learned they intended to come. I could almost picture their faces as they read the invitations, confusion giving way to suspicion, then to curiosity. Good. That was exactly what I wanted. Opening night arrived, and the gallery glowed like a beacon. The prints lined the walls, telling a story of struggle, of defiance, of quiet triumph. The final room was the heart of it all. There, on a pedestal under a spotlight, sat my $10 inheritance, the check framed behind glass, with a small brass plaque that read, "Gifted to Emily Carter at the reading of Henry Carter's will. Value, priceless. Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test." As guests mingled, I stayed in the background at first, watching the room fill with donors, critics, artists, and finally, my family. They arrived together, dressed in their finest, expressions carefully neutral. Andrew looked around, brow furrowed, as if trying to piece together how I was connected to this place. My mother's eyes scanned the room, searching for a sponsor, a benefactor who might have made this possible. My father's jaw tightened as he took in the surroundings, the success he hadn't authorized. They didn't know yet, but they would. I stepped forward when Mr. Whitaker appeared at my side, a rare smile on his face, holding a glass of champagne. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He led me to a small platform near the $10 exhibit, and as he raised his glass, the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Whitaker began, his voice carrying through the gallery, "thank you for joining us tonight at the inaugural exhibition of Harper Light Studio, founded by and dedicated to the artistic vision of Emily Carter." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Cameras lifted. Guests murmured. My family froze. "But there's more," he continued. "It is my honor, as the executor of Henry Carter's private estate, to announce that Emily Carter is the sole beneficiary of the Carter Creative Trust. Tonight, you stand not just in a gallery, but in the heart of a legacy that she now shapes." The applause that followed was thunderous, but I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at them. My family. My mother's lips parted in shock. My father's fists clenched at his sides. Andrew stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, unsure whether to be outraged or impressed. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The applause faded into a soft hum, replaced by the murmur of guests turning to whisper, to wonder, to reframe what they thought they knew. My family stood stiff, as if the walls themselves had shifted. Andrew was the first to speak, stepping closer, his voice low but strained. "Emily, this is all yours?" His eyes darted around, as if looking for the real owner, the real genius behind it all. "Yes," I said simply, my voice steady, stronger than I felt. "Since always." My mother, Susan, recovered enough to put on her fundraiser smile, polished, hollow. "Well, Emily," she said, reaching out as if to place a hand on my arm, but stopping short. "This is quite ambitious. I assume you had help?" "No sponsors," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Just one believer." My father, Robert, scowled, his eyes narrowing as he took in the framed $10 check beneath the spotlight. "Is this some sort of game, Emily?" he demanded. His voice carried across the room, sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "Is that what this is? A setup?" I shook my head, my heart pounding, but my voice calm. "No, Dad, it's a mirror. You just don't like what it's showing you." They didn't speak. They couldn't. What could they say? That they'd laughed too soon? That they'd dismissed me too easily? That their assumptions had blinded them? I turned from them, leaving them standing there in a gallery they didn't understand, surrounded by a story they had refused to see. The guests came forward now. Donors, critics, artists, people who wanted to talk, to ask, to listen. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the creator. But it wasn't over. Not for me. In the days that followed, I finalized the transfer of the Carter Creative Trust, met with advisors my grandfather had quietly lined up for me, and began sketching out the future of the Harper Light Studio. The gallery was just the beginning. I converted the upper floors into work-live spaces for young artists, opened applications for residencies, and reached out to community art programs in Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland, cities where forgotten places mirrored forgotten people. I stayed in my grandfather's penthouse most nights, standing barefoot at the windows, the city sprawling below, the letter he'd written me framed on the wall of my studio. It reminded me of what he'd said. "Wealth isn't what you hold, Emily. It's what you choose to build." My parents didn't contact me. Andrew sent a single email, stiff, awkward, asking if he could visit the gallery privately. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, just clarity. They weren't my audience anymore. They never really had been. The gallery's second exhibit opened 6 months later, a celebration of the first round of resident artists. Their work raw, honest, urgent. I stood at the edge of the room, watching people stop in front of pieces that spoke of struggle, hope, loss, and resilience. And I felt it. The quiet triumph of creating something that mattered, something real. Then, one evening, a knock came at my office door. A young woman, maybe 20, stepped inside. She held a battered camera, not unlike the one my grandfather had given me, her fingers tracing its edges nervously. "Do you ever worry," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "that people only see your money, not your work?" Her question struck me in the heart. I smiled gently. "All the time," I admitted. "But it only matters if I believe it. Lead with your vision. The rest will follow." She nodded, her eyes bright with understanding, and I saw a little of myself in her. That hunger, that doubt, that spark. When the first anniversary of my grandfather's passing arrived, Mr. Whitaker visited the studio with a final letter. Just a few lines, his handwriting now so familiar to me. "Wealth is not what you hold, Emily, but what you choose to build. You were always the legacy I believed in. You just had to believe it too." That night, I left the gallery doors unlocked and lit a single candle in the entryway. A few strangers wandered in, tourists, students, people passing by. They stood in front of the $10 check, reading the plaque, whispering their guesses at the story behind it. They didn't know the full truth. They didn't need to. Because my legacy didn't need explanation. It only needed to be lived. In the months that followed, the gallery flourished in ways I had barely dared imagine. The Harper Light Studio became more than a space for exhibitions. It became a sanctuary, a launchpad, a place where voices too often silenced found light. We launched a residency program that provided not just room and board, but mentorship, equipment, and the kind of quiet encouragement that I had craved all my life. Artists came from across the country, from the Bronx, from rural Oklahoma, from small towns scattered through the Midwest. Each one brought their own story, their way of seeing the world. I found myself growing alongside them. The board meetings for the Carter Creative Trust transformed from intimidating obligations into opportunities, chances to chart a path that balanced profit with purpose. I showed up in black jeans and boots, unapologetic, speaking plainly about what mattered. The other trustees listened, slowly learning that vision could sit at the same table as strategy. My parents, Susan and Robert, stayed distant. I didn't expect apologies, and I didn't need them. Andrew, for a time, sent polite notes about his work, his travels, little olive branches that felt more like habit than heart. I responded kindly but briefly. There was no bitterness left, only clarity. I had learned the difference between roots and weights. Some ties nourish, others hold you down. A year to the day after the opening of the Inheritance of Vision, we hosted a special event, a fundraiser for the residency program. The gallery was alive with new work, paintings, photographs, mixed media, each piece a testimony to resilience and raw talent. I watched from the edge of the room, letting the art and the artists take center stage. This wasn't about me. It never really had been. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, I sat alone in the penthouse studio. Outside, Chicago glowed, a quiet sea of windows and headlights and dreams in motion, and I turned the framed $10 check over in my hands, the glass cool, the paper inside unchanged. It no longer symbolized humiliation or dismissal. It had become my reminder that small beginnings, small inheritances, can carry the greatest power if you dare to see them for what they truly are. And I thought of my grandfather, of his steady hand as he gave me that old camera, of his quiet faith, of his words in that final letter. "You were always the legacy I believed in, Emily. You just had to believe it too." Sometimes late at night, I still heard echoes of that day in the law office. My parents' laughter, the murmurs, the smug certainty that I had been cast aside. But those sounds didn't sting anymore. They reminded me of the turning point, the moment the world tried to measure my worth in dollars, and failed. Now, When young artists ask me what I inherited, I don't speak of money or trusts or studios. I tell them the truth. I inherited freedom, the freedom to define myself, the freedom to build something that mattered, the freedom to see and to help others be seen. And that, I think, was what my grandfather intended all along. That day in the law office, when my parents laughed at my supposed $10 inheritance, it felt like the end of something. But in truth, it was the beginning. My grandfather's letter didn't just give me ownership of a trust or a gallery. It permitted me to be who I had always been and the tools to shape that into a legacy. The Harper Light Studio became more than bricks and glass. It became a place where stories like mine, and unlike mine, could find light. I chose not to use my inheritance for revenge or to prove points. I chose to build, and in building, I found peace. My parents faded from my daily life, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed their validation. Andrew tried, in his way, to bridge the distance, and that was enough. Today, as I stand in the gallery, watching artists I believe in take their first steps, I understand what wealth is. It isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's measured in what we create, what we nurture, and what we leave behind for others to build upon. My grandfather saw that. He believed in it. And now I do too. So if you ever find yourself dismissed, underestimated, handed $10 where you hoped for more, remember, the greatest inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you choose to do with it.